Hey guys, I'm here today to talk about the books I read in the month of September. So I read 7 books, which isn't as many as I hoped. I was hoping to get back to my usual pace of about 12 books a month. I didn't, but I still had quite a nice reading month with a real mixture of books and some types of books that I wouldn't usually read. So it's going to be quite interesting to talk about them. So the first one I'm going to talk about is a graphic novel I read, and that is All Summer Long by Hope Larson. So I sat and read this in an afternoon, and it was just a nice enjoyable graphic novel. This is about a young girl whose best friend goes off to summer camp. She's a girl, as I said, and he's a boy. And so they're at that awkward age where not many of their friends at school are in like best friendships with someone of the opposite sex, and so they're finding that a little bit awkward, and then he leaves for the summer, which she wasn't expecting, so she's sort of left feeling really lonely. And this is about her then forming a friendship sort of with his older sister, who she's always found quite intimidating, and the summer she has because of that. And this is just, you know, an enjoyable graphic novel. There's nothing mind-blowing plot-wise, it's sort of slice of life. The artwork is quite simple, quite clean lines, and all done in this white and sort of peachy tone. So I enjoyed this. I thought it was really cute. This is the sort of graphic novel that if you feel like just reading something light and sort of cheerful and easy, then I'd recommend picking this up from your library perhaps if they have it. You know, this isn't the sort of graphic novel that I completely adore and that I'll really remember, but it was just a nice enjoyable read, and to be honest, that's what I thought when I picked it up. I wasn't expecting to absolutely love this. I just felt like reading something a bit slice of life and nice and cheerful, so this was certainly that. Then the next one is a really odd one for me because it's a young adult book, and that is The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. And because I haven't been reading a ton this year, I thought that leaning towards genre fiction would help me to just want to turn the page more. I think genre fiction tends to be more plot driven, and therefore it's really much easier to just think, I'm going to read the next chapter, I'm going to read the next chapter. And whilst YA isn't genre fiction, right, because it's an age range, I think it has a certain tone to it. Not all YA, but I think a lot of the YA that's more popular, that's the stuff that's always at the top of the charts and spoken about a lot on BookTube, does have a certain tone to it that sort of feels genre fiction in a way. And so I thought I would give some YA a go, and I'd heard loads of people talk about this, and to be honest, it wasn't that as much that pulled me in. It was that I heard a couple of people talk about it who I really trust, but also I read Holly Black when I was a teenager and really adored her books, and so I figured this made the most sense, like 13-14 years later, to go back and pick up some of her newer work. So I think a lot of people know what this is about. If you don't, very briefly, this follows 3 sisters, but we're following one. She's our protagonist, can't remember her name now, and at the beginning of the novel this guy rocks up, kills their parents, and tells the elder sister that he's her father, and he is a fairy, and he takes all 3 of them to the fairy realm to raise them as his own. And then we shoot forward quite a lot of years to our protagonist being like 15, 16, I guess, I can't remember. And we're just following the life she leads. So I really enjoyed the first half of this. I read this in 2 days. You know, I didn't really do much other than read it. I think I read most of it in a day and then finished the last 50 pages the next morning. And even when I was cooking dinner, I was stirring a spag bol, I think it was, while still reading, which isn't something I do very often. So this did exactly what I wanted it to do, right? It really pulled me in. I really enjoyed something that was very plot driven and just easy, and I didn't have to think about a lot. But what I find, and the reason I don't really enjoy YA as much as I would perhaps like to, is because I find when I read books like this, right, I get pulled in and I enjoy it and I want to read loads, and then I get to a certain point, maybe 2/3 of the way through, where I realise it's getting much more plot focused, and I feel like lots of the plot decisions are freaking annoying and I'm not liking them. But then I'm so pulled in that I continue to read really fast because I'm like, well, you know, I was really pulled in, so I should still be really pulled in. And then I get to the end and realise that I'm left with this sort of bad taste in my mouth of almost like, it feels like starting to eat a sweet, like a really like large sweet, and you start eating it and it's a taste explosion, right? It's amazing and you just want to eat it super quickly because it's so good and you just want to eat it all at once. But then by the time you get to the end, I don't know, it doesn't taste as good anymore and it's getting a bit annoying to chew it, and you're starting to feel like your teeth are aching because it's like maybe not so good for you as you thought it was. And then by the end, once you swallow it and you've finished it, what you're left with is feeling a bit like ugh, and like bloated and rubbish because of the sweet. That's a really random description, but that's sort of how I feel about YA. So yeah, I found some of this annoying, but equally it really pulled me through. And you know, every now and again it's nice to read a book that I just don't want to put down. So I really couldn't rate this book because there's loads about it that I really enjoyed because it made me want to read loads, and there's loads about it that I think is filled with issues. So yeah, I probably will pick the next one up because I liked the experience of wanting to read something super fast. And I'm sort of intrigued, but not super intrigued. Yeah, so there's that one. Then another book I read, which is being marketed as YA, but I don't know, I think it sort of is on the borderline, is A Winter's Promise, The Mirror Visitor, Book 1 by Christelle Debas. Oh my god, I'm so sorry, my French is awful. And this is translated by Hildegard Serle, probably said that wrong as well. So this was kindly sent to me from Europa, and this is the first YA book they've published, and it is beautiful, and I've seen quite a few people haul this. So Eleanor and I did a buddy read of this, and I think we both felt around the same, although perhaps I enjoyed it a little bit more than Eleanor. So if you haven't heard, this follows a young girl, never told her age, which I found a little bit difficult because I found her quite difficult to place in terms of age, and I think it mattered to the story really, but you never find it out unless I missed something. And she lives in this magical world, and what it effectively sounds like is that, imagine an Earth sort of like ours, some magical thing happened and it split into loads of shards, and on each shard there's this sort of godlike creature that is the father or mother of every single person who's born on that place, so they're all related, they're like one giant family. And that sort of godlike creature has a power which they pass on through their ancestors, in some people stronger than others, right? So our narrator, I think she's called Ophelia, yeah, I'm pretty sure she is. She has sort of two powers. One is that she can move through mirrors, so she can across short distances move from one mirror to another, and the other is that she can read items, so she can touch things and she can read their history, and through that she can sort of know the people who have owned them. And at the start of the book, she is told that she's been married off to a man from a different family that live on a different sort of shard of this world, and it's one that no one really knows about, and they sort of view them as barbarians, and she's pretty frightened. And then very early on she meets this guy, he seems really moody and just a bit of a prick really, and then she gets sent off, and intrigues, loads of secrets, just stuff happens, right? So about halfway through this book, they go to a different location, and I thought the story really picked up from there. Before that I felt like this could have been a shorter book. I think perhaps around 60 to 100 pages could have been shaved off this, because initially it felt like she arrived at this world and then we had sort of 100 or more pages of her just sort of being confused and finding everyone really rude, and then repeat. But I really enjoyed it once it got to this sort of secondary location, and towards the end, as more sort of intrigue started happening, I did want to know what was going to happen, but I just found this a tad messy plot wise. I think sometimes there would be a bit of dialogue that would have sort of plot reveals within it, and it just wasn't as tidy as it could be. Now I don't know if that's the translation or just the author's writing style, you know, I can't say that really. So I think I enjoyed this enough to continue and read the next one. And the reason I say this is a difficult one to say whether it's YA is because in a way it felt more middle grade or children's book in tone. It really doesn't feel tone-wise like a teen book, and that's because Ophelia comes across very young in some ways. The way she thinks and the way she talks, she comes across as a child who's around 12 years old. But then equally, she's being sent off to be married to this man, and she'll make references to things like not wanting to sleep with him, or the fact that he's going to want to have children from her so that he can pass on his bloodline and stuff. So things like that don't feel suitable for a children's book necessarily. So it's an odd one to age. I'd say it sort of is on the borderline. So yeah, I enjoyed this, but nowhere near as much as I hoped. So yeah, there's that one. And also I will say, like, I was thinking that people have said this is sort of like Northern Lights and things like that, and I don't think it really has that atmosphere. I was expecting more to be done with the world in terms of beautiful descriptions and stuff, and I didn't really feel that through the writing style. So yeah, I enjoyed this one, but I didn't really enjoy it. Then the one I did really enjoy is The Book of Dust, Volume 1, La Belle Sauvage, probably said that wrong, by Philip Pullman, of course. So when this initially came out, I wasn't really that interested because I read the Dark Materials books as an adult, so I didn't have that childhood nostalgia. So when this was announced and there were so many people who were super excited, I was obviously happy for them, but didn't really feel a connection to it myself. And then I was contacted by the publisher about the paperback, and I thought, yeah, I wouldn't mind reading it. I did enjoy his Dark Materials. I didn't really expect to love it, but when it arrived in the post, I did what I always do, and I read the first few pages and just adored it, and just thought, oh god, this just sounds super cosy. So I started reading it like pretty instantly, sat there with a cup of tea and just dove in, and I really enjoyed this. I do really like Philip Pullman's writing style, and I'm tempted now to go back and read some of his other series that are separate from his Dark Materials. I'm pretty sure when I was a child I did read some of them, but I just don't remember. So yeah, I'm sure a lot of you know about this. This is set pre-Dark Materials, and it's about a young boy called Malcolm who works at his family's inn, and he lives across the river from a nunnery, and very early on in the book the nunnery are given a young baby called Lyra to look after, and loads of secretive stuff starts to happen that Malcolm is involved in, and he feels the need to protect Lyra, and an adventure ensues. So I was well on my way to giving this book 5 stars and it being one of my favourite books of the year because I really was loving it. But what I'll say about this is it's one of those books where it's not really a criticism, it's more about what sort of reader you are. So this book has quite a long opening section, which is very much about Malcolm and his family home, all the people he knows, building up all the secrets and intrigue, and it's really slow paced. You have lots of descriptions of him helping his mum, you know, chop the vegetables for the inn, or serving people in the inn, or him going out on little adventures in his boat, or chatting to the nuns, and I adored all of that. Completely loved it, so cosy, I just loved it. I could have read, like, I could have just read a whole book just about Malcolm's winter, like slice of life. Like, I love that sort of stuff. I just find it really cosy. I'm not someone who needs a ton of plot. If the author can write, which Philip Pullman can, I'm happy to read about someone doing not much. And then towards the second half of this book it gets much more plot focused, right? And then towards the final chunk the plot really ramps up and it gets a bit more magical, and that's when I started to enjoy it a bit less. I felt that it went from being this fairly non-magical but sort of I mean, I say non-magical, it's magical, but the magic isn't obvious, it's not right there, it's out of the corner of your eye, it's at the edge of the page, and it becomes a bit more at the forefront, and also the pace picks up, and I just didn't enjoy that as much. So that's not a criticism of the book really, it's just that that's not the sort of reader I am, and so I just felt a little bit sad when it shifted gear, but I really enjoyed this. Definitely one of the books I've enjoyed the most this year, and now I will be pre-ordering the next one. Like, I can't wait to read what happens next, and I really enjoyed this. So if you haven't read it yet, even if you don't have the childhood nostalgia of the Dark Materials books, but you've read them and enjoyed them, then I really would recommend picking this up because I really enjoyed it. So there's that one. The next book I'm going to talk about is Lethal White by J.K. Rowling. So I had been waiting for this like since the last book came out. I've re-listened to the last book on audio a couple of times and watched the series a couple of times on TV, and I'm just obsessed. So I am not into detective fiction and crime fiction, it's just not really my thing. But I picked up the Cormoran Strike series because of who the author was, and whilst I really didn't care about the mysteries, I really care about Robin and Strike, and I just really enjoy them as people and really enjoy watching their friendship and their relationship develop throughout the books. So I actually think mystery wise this book probably has the strongest mystery, and the mystery that I was the most intrigued by. I found in the previous books the mysteries get a little bit messy, and yeah, I think the third and now this one, the fourth, have the strongest mysteries, but it's not what I read them for, right? So this book is around 650 pages. It's a 22-hour long audiobook, and I listened to it in 3 days, and I was working in those 3 days and I could not listen to audiobooks at work. So I literally got home from work, I'd lie on the sofa with my audiobook in and just listen. Completely obsessed, because I wanted to know what was going to happen between Robin and Strike and their relationship. So I don't want to really spoil a lot, you know, I think a lot of people have read the books. What I will say is this: I enjoyed this book, but nowhere near as much as I thought. And actually when I got to the end, I felt a little bit robbed, because I got to a point in the book where it actually started to go towards where I wanted it to go, and what I'd been wishing it would do for the last, you know, 20 odd hours that I'd been listening. And then I looked and there was 14 minutes to go, and I thought, you've got to be taking the piss, like, I cannot believe we've got to this point and there's only 14 minutes, which means that I'm not going to get any closure, like, you're just going to leave me hanging for another like 2 years. So yeah, without spoiling anything, I felt that this book was a bit of a tease and a little bit filler. So whilst I still really enjoyed the whole process of reading it, I thought the crime was good, I thought all the new characters involved with the crime were interesting, and I really liked what happened with Robin and Strike and with their other relationships. I just felt that this should either have been a shorter book, so you felt like you were being teased less, or it should have just had more in it about them, like it should have gone further, because now I feel like I'm in exactly the same spot as I was 2 years ago when the last one finished, really. So I feel like this book almost, yeah, could have, the plot of this book in terms of their relationship could have been handled in a different way that would have been done in 50 pages, and this book wouldn't be necessary. So yeah, feel a bit cheated, still really enjoyed the experience, but just a bit peeved that I now have to wait another couple of years. So yeah, there's that one. And then another book I read is The Electric Michelangelo by Sarah Hall. So I started to read this during a reading vlog, which I'll link up here somewhere, and I was adoring it. Like, by the time I was 50 pages in, I thought this was going to be one of my favourite books of the year. I really love her writing style. So this is set in the early 1900s, I think, and follows a boy called, I think we pronounce it Cy, through most of his life. And he lives in Morecambe Bay, which is a small seaside town in northern England, and then you're told on the back that he eventually moves to Coney Island in America. And he trained as a tattooist when he's quite young, and so this sort of follows his life tattooing in these two different seaside towns. So here's my issue: she writes absolutely beautifully. She is perhaps the most detailed lyrical writer I've ever read. So I feel like if you struggle with writers who go really overboard on description, then 100% do not read this book. Her newest novel, The Wolf Border, isn't as lyrical as this. I enjoyed that one more, but this one certainly is like super descriptive. Some of the sentences, you're like, God, you read them and you're like, that's so like almost over the top, right? It's so detailed, and some of the sentences are so long. Now I really enjoy that if, and only if, it doesn't overtake the narrative. And the struggle in this book is what you're told on the back is effectively the whole book, because not much really happens. You read the blurb on the back and you think, okay, that's maybe going to be the first maximum half of the book, and then there'll be plot that I don't know. There really isn't. Pretty much like one plot device isn't mentioned on the back, and everything else you know going in. So this is more just a character study and a location study of these two seaside resorts, but she hammers that home too much. So two of the things that really pissed me off is that she tends to find something she enjoys writing about, and then she does it once beautifully and you're like, that's phenomenal. And then she does it again and you think, that's weird, like I feel like the editor should have removed that, because it's effectively a repetition of what she just said, but it using slightly different beautiful words. And then that happens 10 more times. And by that point, you're just skimming, because you're like, why are you doing this anymore? I know you can write beautifully, but you're treating me like an idiot because you've told me this time and time and time again. And this is a life in, you know, really explicit detail. So if I had not picked this up myself, then like, when could I? And the two examples of that is he develops quite a volatile relationship with a man who's training him to be a tattooist, and the amount of times you're told about that relationship is ridiculous. And then once he gets to Coney Island, the amount of different pages she uses to describe Coney Island and the atmosphere there is ridiculous. Like perhaps 2 separate descriptions of Coney Island and what it's like would have been fine, but by the time you get to 10, 15, it's just unnecessary. So it really saddened me, because I think in the end I'd end up just saying this book was okay, and I don't really think I'd recommend it. I'd be tempted to recommend excerpts as though they're short stories, because they truly are beautiful, in particular the opening chapters where he's at Morecambe Bay and he's a young boy. But after that, this book's just one big repetition with not really much happening. And also, actually, I don't think Si's really that developed as a character. He doesn't really change. Everything you find out about him is the stuff that's just repeated. So yeah, this was a real disappointment in the end. I still think she's a fantastic author in terms of the way she writes. But having seen her at a talk, she referenced the fact that she enjoys writing short stories more. And I think this book perfectly illustrates that, because some of these chapters would have been amazing as short stories, but just didn't work for me in a novel, so that was a bit of a disappointment. And then the last book I read is a non-fiction, and that is I Am, 17 Brushes with Death by Maggie O'Farrell. So I've heard so many people rave about this, so I'm not going to say a ton. I really enjoyed this. I thought it was really beautifully written. I haven't read any of her novels, but I am going to go back and pick them up. I'm tempted to do it in order, because I never do that. She has quite a back catalogue, perhaps 6 or 7 books, I think, so that could work out quite well. But yeah, I think this is really good. The one thing I'll say is I was worried about reading this because I'm not very good with blood, needles, gore, stuff like that, and actually this didn't bother me. I found it fine. I know some people say that some of these brushes of death are a bit tenuous, but in fact I find that a rather bizarre thing to comment on, because some of them are like ridiculous, that it would happen once in someone's lifetime, but then there's like, you know, sort of, I didn't count, but there's several really significant brushes with death, where if I had more than one of them I'd be appalled, but she has way more than one. So I think we can forgive her for some of them being a bit more tenuous. And I don't feel like the focus of this book is really the brushes with death themselves. I feel like this book is just more an example of how beautifully she writes and how she views the world and the sort of life she leads, and she just does that through these brushes of death. I feel like they're more a construction as to how to just give us some beautiful writing and some beautiful thoughts. So yeah, I really enjoyed this and I definitely recommend it, and I found it a really quick read, and it's made me really want to go back and read her novels, so there's that one. So yeah, those are the books I've read. I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on any of them. I think these are quite interesting books to chat about, you know, especially because some of them made me a bit like unsure as to how I felt. So do put your thoughts down below, and let me know what you read and anything you enjoyed. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!